This is Charlie Gillett here, and I was looking back at my records this morning and found a Fat Man in 1949 with Earl Palmer on drums. Last night I went to see Marie Muldaur at Ronnie Scott's, and there's Earl Palmer playing drums. And the first thing I've got to ask you, Earl, you play very quiet. I mean, I think a nightmare in modern music is the whole of the band has to keep a little bit louder than the drummer. And if the drummer plays too loud, everybody else gets too loud, and it's a nightmare.
It's a tendency to get bigger and bigger.
So have you always tended to do that, or do you adjust to the circumstances? Or?
Well, so I've been told. To me, it doesn't seem I'm playing that soft. I imagine it's sitting behind the drums. You hear the drums more than anyone else, and I guess being aware of not trying to be too loud keeps me playing softer than I think I am.
When you were first recording, would it be true there'd be just like one or two mics in the studio? And
no, in the studio, there's mics on every part of your kit.
But when you began recording?
When I began recording at Cosmos, no, I think there was only 3 mics he used in the whole studio. The guys used to group around, and the separation he got was amazing because of the way the guys would have to group around one mic. And there was one mic, for example, on the old Fats Domino dates and Little Richard dates, guys who sang and played piano. He had one mic that was situated on the piano. He didn't have one in the piano and one for the vocal. He used that same mic for the vocal and the piano. And then the horns would group around one mic, and the other mic would be on let's say the bass and the guitar. They used to use one amplifier for the bass and the guitar. And the other mic that the guys would group around would be a directional mic that the 3 horns would be on one side, and it would pick up the drums from the other side. So he only had like 3 mics in Cosmo's old studio.
And how many times would he have to rehearse in order for him to get the balance right?
Very little as compared to today's standards. Because for some reason or other, then they weren't as concerned about separation in those days as they are now. I don't know, maybe it was because of the way the guys played as opposed to the way they play now, but separation wasn't as big a factor then as it is now. And nowadays in recording studios, the drummer is more or less in the booth by himself, and the horns are most of the time across the room, separated from you. Hence the reason for earphones more so nowadays than they used to before. We never used to use earphones in a recording session before. Now it's absolutely necessary because you're so far from the rest of the players.
And when you'd be recording with somebody like Fats in the early days, would you generally be recording songs that you already had played live quite a lot, or would you sometimes go in with new material?
No, because when we were recording with Fats, that was Dave Bartholomew's band recording with Fats. And the things that we would record wouldn't have been played before other than in the studio. We'd run them down a couple of times and then record them.
Well, how would you first get to know how they went?
Well, Dave would more or less explain the concept he wanted on the tune and what he wanted here and there. But all of those things were fairly simple. I guess that's one of the reasons for their success, is simplicity.
But how had you got into Dave's band? Because you must have been really young in those days.
I got into Dave's band. I was in music school at the time, and I had been playing in a club in the French Quarter after I got out of the service. And I later decided to go to music school through the urging of some friends of mine. Because at that time, I was playing, but I wasn't reading. I didn't know what I was doing. And like a lot of New Orleans musicians at the time, we didn't realize the importance of learning to read music. Most of the younger ones coming up at that time. And these friends of mine who was in music school already, like Red Tyler, used to tell me, why don't you come to music school? And I was seriously considering going to tailoring school or refrigeration school or something like that on the GI Bill. And he said, why don't you come to music school? You're making your living playing music. And at first I didn't think it was necessary because I was already making a living playing music. And from being told from other people that I was very good, maybe I had a little ego then at that age, Charlie. But finally, they convinced me, thank God, that I should go to music school, and I did. And Dave had a drummer who was a friend of my mother's in the family named Dave Oxley, who was a very fine drummer. But he and Dave Bartholomew had a parting of the ways some kind of way, and some of the guys in Dave's band had been telling him, why don't you hire that kid? he's pretty good and he would like to play in the band. So finally I sat in with the band one night. They played at a club called Tony's Tavern in my neighborhood. As a matter of fact, on the corner of my house. And I went down there and played with him one night. And about a week later, he called me and asked me if I wanted to join the band. You know, I said, of course I do.
And he was already recording at the time you joined the band, was he?
No, Dave hadn't really started recording then. We later began recording. Deluxe Records came down to New Orleans and spoke to Dave about doing some records there, producing for them. And we did some artists. I don't remember who it was. Then Lou Chudd came to New Orleans and spoke to Dave about getting talent and recording for Imperial. That's when Dave really got into the recording, and he used his band, naturally. He used his band to do the recording, and then the company started bringing the artists to New Orleans to record. But
and the studio was already there? What had been happening there before?
Cosmo, that was actually, he had a little studio in the back of a record store. It was J&M Music Shop, which sold records primarily. And he had this little studio in the back that now and then announcers would come in and do spots. And he decided to make a recording studio out of it. So he just put 2 more mics in and made a recording studio out of it. And we did those first records right there, Fat's first records, Jewel King, and Smiley Lewis, and Tommy Ridgely. And all of those things were done right in that little studio. This is long before Cosmo moved to a larger place, because he didn't move there until after I left New Orleans. And I think it was around 58 when he moved to the other larger studio. But that original studio was originally a record shop with just a little interview room in the back, which he made not much bigger than this room.
And when Fats went out on the road as a result of his success, was Dave's band involved in playing behind him, or was it a totally different set of musicians?
No, the first time Fats went on the road was following the success of Fat Man and Detroit City Blues, and he went with Dave's band. And there was a girl in New Orleans who we'd recorded, had done a tune called 3 times 7. Her name was Jewel King. And at the time, her record was even a little more popular than Fat's record in the area that we were going to tour. But she refused to go at the last moment because they didn't want her husband's band. They wanted Dave's band. Well, naturally, Dave was with Imperial, and Imperial more or less set up the tour. So she refused to go, and which was, I think, a terrible mistake on her part, because I haven't heard anything of her since. So in her place, we took Professor Longhair on that tour. And in many places, he outshone Fats. As a matter of fact, most places, he was better received than Fats. Because he was good, he was good visual artist, he was funny.
But I gathered that because of the way he played, Professor Longhair might be harder for a band to play with, because he...
Yeah, he was. He was such an unorthodox player. But the things he played, he didn't play anything that we didn't know already. So, because at the time, the amount of things he knew was very limited. He knew very few things. And those things he knew were things that we knew how to play, and we knew when he'd skip a bar or jump the meter or something. So we were familiar with it. He was quite a hit. Although the whole tour was a flop, but he was quite a hit on the tour.
And that was really the first sort of coming out of New Orleans music into the rest of America, was that right?
As far as I know, yeah, because we were about the first group that left there with a recording artist, you know, like Fats was at that time from the first hit record. And I don't know what happened, bad publicity or not enough publicity or what, but the whole tour was a flop.
But the success of the record over the next few months, was that a cause of the amount of recording there was from then on in New Orleans?
Yes, I would think so. I would think so, because that was one of the earliest records done there.
And do you remember the sort of the feeling that more and more people around the country, and eventually the teenagers, were becoming interested?
Well,
were you aware of that as a sort of development, or not particularly?
No, not then. No, we only began to realize the importance of it when the record companies began bringing artists there to record, bringing artists to New Orleans to record with this particular band because we had done all the records. So then we became aware of its importance, but we still couldn't grasp it because it wasn't anything really different from what we had been playing all the time. So we really didn't look at it as a new form of music. But we knew it was becoming important throughout the country because the record companies were coming there to record with us guys. Aladdin signed Shirley and Lee, and we used to do Shirley and Lee dates there and a couple of other artists. As a matter of fact, they didn't have but one or two artists in New Orleans. I think Shirley and Lee and some other artists I'm not sure of. Art Roop, Little Richard was on specialty, and like I say, Art Roop brought Sam Cooke and Little Richard to New Orleans to record with us guys. Little Richard was an experience to record with. He was very funny all the time, and as I was saying to someone earlier, seems like every time we recorded Little Richard, it was after he had done a concert on Sunday night, and he'd come in the studio with a briefcase with all of the gate receipts. And being the kind of fun-loving guy he is, and we joking a lot, he had the damnedest time keeping our hands out of that briefcase with all of that money, that cash money sitting in it. And he was very good about it, you know. But it was fun all day. We hand in the bag and doing the record days, hand in the bag and doing the record days.
And who did those arrangements on those?
Dave did those arrangements on Richard.
Because that was a different sort of thing. It was a much more aggressive sound than, say, Pats's records would have had.
Well, that stemmed from Richard. He was much more aggressive type audience. His artist, his music was that kind, you know. It was the shouting, screaming, aggressive kind of rhythm and blues that he was doing. Whose records were a great success. And from then, I decided to move to Los Angeles in 1955, but I didn't leave until 57 because my wife that I was with at the time, she wouldn't leave, and we had 4 children, and I just hung around, and finally we separated, and I later remarried, and my marriage was a mixed marriage, and we couldn't stay in New Orleans at that time, not too long. So finally we moved to Los Angeles in 1957, and I went there working for Aladdin Records as a producer and arranger for Aladdin.
Well, if that ain't half an hour or 40 minutes of the best music you ever heard on Honky Tonk, you've been listening to the wrong program all the time. That was Earl Palmer, and thanks for him to coming in. We sort of came back to where we started with the Los Angeles record, copying New Orleans. And next week we're going with Earl talking about his days in Los Angeles. So if you tuned in late and didn't know who we were talking to, serves you right. Wake up on time. Earl Palmer, the drummer.